Yo, what's good everybody? It's your friendly Naruto Taco, swinging back at you with another what if video. Today I'm bringing you guys something brand new to you. Brand new to you. But I have done the series before, but I never finished it. And what I want to do with this series is continue it. So I want to continue this series and basically drop one large part every couple of days maybe, and just finish and bank this series off. I need to finish the series. I haven't done that yet on Taco What Ifs, and I'm sorry for the 4 weeks hiatus. I would explain myself, but if you guys follow me on IG, you can get an explanation there. Before we start this video, I just want to make something brand new known to you. If you join the JBG Discord now, you may have the possibility to play Minecraft with me, Big Gucci Taco. Yes, play Minecraft with me. I've started my own server with a couple of friends who are now my mods on that server, and we really need some extra people to work with. We want to make this server something big. We're playing with mods and Vanilla Plus. It's Java only, unfortunately, but I am working on a Realm server where people who have Xbox, PlayStation, or people who just play on mobile can all get together and play with me. In order to get an invite to the server, however, you have to be an avid part of the Taco What Ifs community. You have to follow me on Twitch, Instagram, and join the JBT Discord server. If you do all those 3 things, you can get a link to our Java server. In this server, we're going to be doing very active things. The mods are going to be very active. I myself might not be very active because I might not find the time to play Minecraft with you guys all the time, but I'll make sure to pop my head in there probably every once or twice a week. I'll be streaming what we do on this server live on Twitch. So go follow me over there or on my Big Gucci Taco YouTube channel where I might be streaming, might not. I don't really know for sure. Just make sure that you're up to date with everything I'm doing because I'm back and better than ever. It's been 21 days since the last Big Gucci Taco video. Let's try not to make this another habit from my old channel, bring it to my new. I'm going to be posting some of the older videos from Big Gucci Taco onto Taco What Ifs a little bit more. And let's hit 10K by the end of the year. A new Welcome to 2022 video will be coming out soon, explaining what I want to do on this channel. But beyond that, I will see you guys in the future, and I hope that you enjoy this AU video. What if Sokka could waterbend? In the world of Avatar, the element of water is one of the most, if not most versatile bending ability styles that we've ever seen. We all know that Katara was the last waterbender left in the Southern Water Tribe after the 100-Year War, and the Fire Nations continued raids and attacks on the tribe. They would raid the tribes and capture all the waterbenders, imprisoning them so they weren't able to pass down their waterbending genes to their potential children. On one of these final raids, they would raid Katara and Sokka's tribe in full force, looking for the last waterbender in the Southern Water Tribe. Katara's mother would pridefully and heroically give up herself as the last waterbender. Even though she wasn't, she was doing it to protect the true last waterbender. She would be dragged out of her home as her daughter and son were forced to watch her be taken away and stowed on a Fire Nation ship. But this was the least she could do in her mind. What she was sacrificing in her life was nothing compared to what the potential, because she was not the last waterbender. Katara were. There were waterbenders left now, her children, and they were the future of the Southern Water Tribe. So, what's up everybody, it's me, Big Gucci Taco, back for another video. Today I'm bringing you guys the alternate Avatar universe where Sokka is born with waterbending alongside his sister Katara. In this video we're going to be tackling and covering the events of Book 1 or Season 1 of the Avatar The Last Airbender story. What events will change due to Sokka's newfound abilities, and how is this character different from the Sokka we know? How will Sokka having waterbending affect the characters around him? Find out about all that and more in this video. Before we start the video, I want to say, if you could leave a like on the video and comment down there in the comment section, that would mean so much to me, as it helps new people find this channel and helps the community surrounding the Avatar alternate universes grow. He was 3 the first time he bended. His mother had been trying to get him to go to bed when all he wanted to do was stay up and listen to one of his father's tales about warriors, tiger seal hunts, and sailing the ocean, visiting far-off lands that he'd never heard of. The boy started throwing a tantrum, yelling and pounding his fists and kicking his feet. He tried in vain to make his parents keep him up. His mother shook her head and tried to pick the boy up, which caused him to beat the ground even harder, where tiny cracks formed beneath the furs of the igloo. One last pound later,
He found himself drenched, a shock reflected in his wild blue eyes, as well as the faces of his parents. It didn't take long for Hakoda and Kaya to notice their eldest son, Sokka, was a waterbender. The firstborn to the tribe since the raid on the South Poles, stole away all of them. Sokka didn't understand it at first. All he knew was that water tended to do strange things while he was around. He didn't know the danger that he was in, and the danger that his family was in. Especially since a year later, his baby sister Katara had gotten so upset with him overtaking her favorite doll that she caused a wave of the water to erupt from a jug at the back of the igloo and drenched them both. All he understood was that he and his sister were special, since neither of them saw anyone that could do anything like them with water. He and his sister tended to play together instead, often getting into water fights that resulted in the both of them getting soaked from head to toe, and trying to explain this to an exasperated Kaya that had fallen. Katara of course was a natural, and it seemed effortlessly for her to bend water to her will with only a few gestures. Sokka, however, was more apt to causing accidents, and often lost in the fights between him and his sister, with odd steps that seemed to make him trip up constantly. Katara often tried to show her older brother the finer gestures that would help him control the water better. Often, those missteps would cause him just to mess up constantly. Katara often joked that he didn't have to add any extra flair into his movements. Sokka grumbled that he was controlling the water Sokka style. "Well, maybe you're too excited, Sokka," Katara suggested one day. Both of them were helping out the women hang strips of meat to dry. Sokka scowled at the idea of not being with them into the tribe, but he decided that since they needed a strong pair of hands, it was fine, and he stuck there instead of hunting with the men. "I'm not excited, Katara. I'm just not as good a bender as you." Sokka hung up a strip on the line. Besides, maybe it was a mistake. He turned and realized that his 7-year-old sister was glaring at him. Geez, what did he do now? "The spirits don't make mistakes, Sokka. Gran said it herself." "Oh, that again." "Well, maybe they did in my case. How else do you explain the fact that I can't even get any of the basic forms down?" Sokka then let out a heavy sigh. "Besides, I'm not even sure I even want to bend anymore." The air around him suddenly turned frosty as Katara snorted. She threw up her hand in disgust and stormed off. Sokka tried to go after her, but ended up falling backwards on his feet and they wouldn't budge. Somehow, in her annoyance, Katara had managed to freeze his lower legs inside the ice. Sokka tried to pull his legs free, but it didn't work, and then he attempted to bend the ice off him. That was met with mixed results as his legs were freed from the ice, but not his feet. He looked over at the other women. Most of them were just snickering behind their hands. Grumbling, he tried multiple times to bend the ice off of his feet, and when they were freed, he stormed off. "Stupid magic water stuff," he mumbled. For the next several weeks, Sokka avoided Katara whenever she would try to practice her waterbending with him. It wasn't that he was mad at her, it was just the fact that he was mad at himself. It didn't help at all that Katara tried to drag him off to practices almost every day as well. It finally came to a head when he yelled at her to leave him alone, that he would practice on his own. This was not missed by their parents. However, Hakoda watched the two of them bicker over bending inside. He knew that it wasn't right that Sokka was ignoring the one thing that he was born with, but he also knew that Sokka had a point. The boy was never going to be able to train as a waterbender as long as there were no masters around, and it hurted him to see both of his children essentially growing angrier and angrier with each other over that simple problem. Kaya was also watching, getting frustrated with them seemingly being hostile towards each other. They were a family, and being a part of the water tribe was a close connection to their family. Her mother-in-law had stated as such. Like it or not, the two of them would have to resolve their differences or risk tearing the family apart. However, it was Kana, their grandmother, that stepped between the two in their fight that day, and they were finally able to resolve the problem. When both waterbenders had gotten into their most recent scrap over the issue, the older woman snatched both of them by the ear and dragged them into her hut. "What is the matter with both of you?" she said. "I've seen tiger seals with less hostility during the mating season than with you two. Why do you guys do this to each other?" "He won't waterbend," Katara explained, pointing a pudgy finger at Sokka's direction. Sokka crossed his arms and shook his head. "So? It's not like I want to play with magic water." "But you're a waterbender," she says. "You have to do it. Mom said we're the only ones in the tribe that can do it. I never wanted to be one." Kana's eyes opened wide at this admission. Just because everyone says I have to doesn't mean I want to, Katara. That's not right. What if we're the only ones who can stop the war and bring waterbending back to the tribe? Katara shot back at her brother and glared at him and crossed her arms. Alright, that's enough. Kana really lost her cool attitude, but she had it up to there with the two children. But the two children in front of her were still testing her patience like no one else in the tribe could. Perhaps with the execution of her son and Bato, his friend. Now, Katara, just because you believe that Sokka should learn waterbending doesn't mean he has to. He has to decide that for himself and what he should do and should not do. It's all up to Sokka. Then she turns to Sokka and says, and Sokka, you're a waterbender. Whatever you do, you're a waterbender. Whether you want to admit it or not. But I'm not good at it. I keep on messing up badly. Remember last month when I dropped Kato's house into the ice? I didn't mean to. I messed up. What Katara was trying to show me. Sokka then just threw his hand up in exasperation. And you apologize for that. Just because you made a mistake doesn't mean you should give up entirely on it, Kana rebuttals with. Maybe I'm not supposed to be a waterbender, Sokka slumped. And Kana could tell that he was pleading. Maybe I'm supposed to be a great warrior. I'm good at the boomerang. I can hit a block of ice from a good distance. That's good for something. You just keep on practicing throwing that thing when you should be practicing waterbending, Katara stated. Kana frowned. Maybe you should speak with your father about this. I know that there are no teachers for waterbending here, and perhaps it could be a good idea for you to try something new until we get a teacher. You mean you're just gonna let him give up? Katara looked in shock at the older woman, but Kana could tell that the younger girl was more hurt than anything. I never said for him to give up waterbending, she says, but perhaps wait for a teacher. Sokka, however, looked hopeful. You mean I don't have to work on it now? Kana's lips pursed. Just until we can get a teacher for the both of you. Katara groaned and Sokka grinned broadly. Kana would tell Katara that it was no point in arguing anymore. But I'm gonna go look and see if your mom needs me with anything. With that, the younger siblings stormed out. And Sokka stood too. He rubbed the back of his head and says, I'm gonna go look for Dad. Maybe he'd be willing to show me some stuff. He dashed out of the hut, doing just that. Kana sighed. Maybe it wasn't the best solution, but at least it got the two of them to stop arguing over something that wasn't likely to change anytime soon. She almost wished she was younger in that exact moment, and that maybe there was no war, but she knew better. Wishing wasn't going to change what was happening now, and she knew without a shadow of a doubt that this was fate, and she also knew that she was too old for any of this. Sokka concentrated. The small creature in front of him was sticking its nose out from its burrow, testing the air to see if there was any danger. The boy held his breath, not wanting to scare the creature away, when finally it braved the outside world. A sudden whirring noise was all the warning it got before a boomerang hit its head squarely. Sokka grinned at the result. Catching an Arctic rabbit hen was very difficult, since the creatures were likely to be startled by any noise and any balls. Squawking an alarm for its neighbors while he caught it, it probably was more luck than actual skill, although he had listened to what his father told him about how to hunt these small creatures. He was sure that he goofed it up and made some sort of noise, but the result was that for once he could bring home and feel good. He's gotten a family dinner. Still grinned and he whistled. A small white polar bear dog then pounded up and sniffed at the boy. Kiba, fetch! The dog then glanced over at Sokka and then at the corpse ahead. Kiba bounced over to the dead rabbit and brought it back to Sokka. Kiba had been a gift to Sokka on his 9th birthday when his father had decided that a hunter would need a good dog to help him with his tracking. He had been a litter-born just last spring, and the two had bonded instantly. Having Kiba as a pet had been worth it, seeing as he was the only boy his age. Same things that he could do would be really lonely for Sokka. He had gotten his first kill. Sokka couldn't help but imagine what his mother was going to make with it. Absently, he gave the dog a piece of fish and patted him on the head. Mind still focused on the possibility of what he was going to make for dinner, he didn't notice black snow falling above him until Kiba sniffed it and snorted. Sokka then looked over and then around, realizing that black snow was falling all around him. What he immediately thinks? Snow is supposed to be white, not black, and as more fell around him, he decided, just this once, to bend it away. The black snow, however, would not bend to his command, and Sokka gave up, instead determined to run back home and tell everyone. When he got back, the village was in an uproar. The men were running around gathering their weapons in all sorts, and the women were shouting the children into their huts. Sokka looked around for his father and mother, but he didn't see either of them. It was at this point that he decided to go back and look at their hut. Then he ran into Katara. Instead, his sister looks terrified and was running back towards the hut as fast as her little legs could carry her. Sokka! She stumbled into a halt. Dad told me that we need to get inside, she yells. Where's Dad? He's with the other men. They said that all the kids need to go inside, Katara then says, and put her gloved hand to his face. No, Sokka, we need to get inside, now, she yells. I'm supposed to be a warrior. How am I going to do that if I can't help? He held his arms around in a dramatic fashion and says, I'm going. Sokka then turned on his heel and ran. The rabbit hen he had caught was abandoned in the snow. He raced towards the beach where the men had run towards, and he neared there. And maybe they'll be in his help, he started to think. But when he got to the beach, he stopped in his tracks. A giant metal ship had wedged itself onto the beach, and several dozen of the men in red and black were fighting the warriors of his tribe. The men of his tribe were wearing their normal outfits, having little time to prepare for the arrival of these invaders. Scanning the beach, he caught the sight of the tribesmen fighting with several of the invaders. Dad, he thought. Ignoring the danger, he started forward, a warrior cry carrying him. At least it sounded to him like a cry a warrior would make. Remember, this is his first time going into a situation like this. More than likely, however, his yell of sneak attack was probably not the best thing he could have done in that moment. One of the invaders turned and shot a dart of flame toward the boy. His eyes going wide, his arms lifted up in a defensive gesture, and prayed that the fire would miss him. When nothing happened, he peeked over his hands, covering his face, and a sheet of ice stood between him and the firebender. He could only stare in disbelief. He had actually done it. It didn't make any sense at all. He had abandoned his bending, so why did it return to save him? He barely noticed the shield protecting him had cracked and shattered, revealing the firebender. Well. And here we thought there was only one of you barbarians that could bend water. Or are you the whelp we're looking for? What's a whelp? Sokka then says. Okay, so maybe that wasn't the best thing he could come up with, but at that moment, he was shocked. His mind wasn't processing the fact that the firebender was probably trying to fry him the most out of everybody on that beach. He stood there dumbly, looking at the man like he had grown a second head. Dumb too. It's good, like, we're gonna get rid of filth like you. And with that, the firebender's fist had flared. Before the firebender could attack, however, a machete arched down, causing the man to dodge. Hakoda had appeared and was now shoving the firebender back with a growl. If you honestly think that kid has much control of his bending, then maybe it's you that's dumb. The firebender's eyes went wide. Showing yourself not to save Trath, huh? Pathetic. He then punched a flame in Hakoda's direction. Sokka watched the two men fight. His mind was slowly piecing together what had just been said, and realizing just what the invaders' words meant. Waterbenders. They're after waterbenders. It suddenly made so much sense to him. The fact that the Southern Water Tribe had no benders, Hakoda instructing the both of them to get back home, and the invaders coming to their shore. It made a sort of sixth sense, and it left Sokka nauseated. What was this? What had happened to the rest of the benders? Did they get captured and killed by these men? It made no sense. He hadn't done anything to the Fire Nation. Why were they after him? The firebender was skilled. Hakoda was slowly being beaten down by that other man, and a sudden realization swept over the boy. If he didn't do anything, his father was going to die. And just as he readied his boomerang, a sudden sweep of the firebender's legs caught Hakoda by surprise and knocked him to the ground. Fire dagger in hand, he plunged it into Hakoda's unprotected face. Something then snapped within Sokka. It was almost like a floodgate, and Sokka was unable to fight against the current of a sudden something, causing him to almost drown in it. He couldn't realize anything, and as soon as it had appeared, it disappeared. His hand clamped down onto his shoulder, and with a gasp, Sokka was pulled to the ground, and the first thing the boy did was swing at the perpetrator. A soft oof was heard, and then it registered fine that he had swung, and it wasn't necessarily in somebody who was covered in black and red, but instead blue. He looked up, hoping perhaps he had been mistaken, that his father was the one that stopped whatever this was, but disappointed to find Bako looking down on him instead. Easy, Sokka, he says. You're right. Just get back into town. The oldest man's voice was cracking with something, and Sokka's stomach froze. He spun around despite Bako's warning of, don't. He had to know. His dad was just fine, right? His eyes fell, however, to the still form of Hakoda. Some of the other men gathered around and were checking over him. Across from Sokka, he could see him, the form of the firebender, and it was almost impossible to keep from throwing up. gut torn. To open his eyes, the machete laying next to him, his face was blank and unseeing. Sokka tried to focus on his father, and when one of the guys checked for a pulse and shook his head, Sokka's stomach plummeted. Sokka's view was suddenly blocked by Bato, but the scream that he heard was instead of his own. Sokka had to look on, crying, throwing up, in a heap of dangerous emotions. His father was dead. Anyway guys, that's the first chapter of What If Sokka Could Waterbend, or Sokka the Waterbending Menace. I don't know what you guys want to call this series. Tell me down below. I'm calling it What If Sokka Could Waterbend for now. This is more of an AU fanfiction reading. Tell me what you guys think about this. Do I do more videos in this style? And if I do, you know, these are really not as easy to make as you think, but easier to make than what ifs, so I can be able to put these out on a consistent basis. Remember, this is just chapter 1, giving you guys a teaser of what you could potentially get in the next chapters. I think if I'm going to be continually doing this, we're going to have to up the time for these videos. Maybe 45 to, I don't know, an hour-long videos filled with 2 to 3 chapters of this fanfiction story. If you guys think that'll be interesting to you, you already know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun jazz, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Avatar, The Legend of Sokka, Chapter 2. Katara fumed as she regarded the ice in front of her. It had been nearly a month since the attack that took her father's life, but that just made her more determined to learn waterbending. She didn't care if she was a girl or not, but she'd be ready for them the next time they decided to come to her village again. She made sure of that. Besides, she was the only one that could waterbend anymore, or that would waterbend anymore. Sokka had stopped entirely. After their father's funeral, Sokka had proclaimed that he would never waterbend again, no matter how many times Katara had nagged him. Even after an entire month, he hadn't budged, and now Katara was stuck with the knowledge that she was not the only waterbender in the entire South Pole that would bend, at least. What infuriated her more was that so far, no one had pressed Sokka on the issue. Sure, Dad died, she knew that, and yes, that made Sokka the only male in the family that could support them. The other men were busy teaching Sokka everything they knew so he could provide, especially since the raid didn't just hit her family hard. She glanced around. There were at least 3 homes that had been torched by firebenders that had come onto their shores. The others were close to the village, and that's where they all had come to attack. At least 3 girls she had grown up with had died that day, and Sokka had at least 2 male friends that had perished in the blazes. None were quite Sokka's age. The oldest was a year younger than her herself, but that didn't mean that they weren't close. I mean, you had to be. They were the only boys around. At least, she thought, they still had their family. One boy that survived was without either parent. Akira no longer had either of his parents, was now being raised by Bato. Bato, who was now the head of the tribe and the chief. She could understand why Akira was angry and upset. Maybe it had something to do with being a boy, she thought. She whipped down her arm and the ice in front of her cracked. Sokka wasn't the only one who was hurting because of what happened. She wanted to make sure that the Fire Nation would pay for that particular reason. But to completely shun his bending? That was almost like cutting off one of his own arms, or both. You just didn't do that. And besides, she could still show him some of the things that she had been figuring out about waterbending. She could get water to move at her command, to separate, to melt, and to freeze. Not nearly as good as some of the stories she'd heard about master benders. They could really make the water move, manipulating even the ocean with their will. It was described to her as a dance, where the bender could move as gracefully and as accurately as she or he wished, and the water would react accordingly. She could almost imagine herself as one such bender, a beautiful dancer that moved as the moon did during its eternal dance throughout the skies. As she moved through emotion she called skimming the water, she again thought about herself as, someone who's appointed a task. She should learn waterbending, even if she had to teach herself. It was probably going to take a lot of trial and error to do it, but if her ancestors had done it, then so could she. No one else was ever going to take anyone else away from her. Ever again. Got one. Sokka almost jumped up and down in joy at the sight of the fish dangling from the end of his fishing spear. It had taken him numerous times, even though he had a pile of fish next to him in the snow. The fact still remained that he was glad that he finally had gotten spearfishing down. Bato had suggested practicing his spear thrust with fish, and the older man had told him that when he was good at that, he could move on to bigger game, like tiger seals. He leaned over and started stringing the fish together. Today had been more of a test for the 13-year-old than anything, and now they had gotten down a crucial skill, he knew that he could go on and hunt with the men and see what they were planning next. They were talking about going on a tiger seal hunt to make sure they had enough supplies laid in for winter. The meat, of course, would be smoked for food, and the fat rendered for fuel. The skins would be used for clothing. Besides, it wasn't like he was being allowed to go on a whale hunt later that month, but at least doing this meant that he could go on other hunts in the future. When he had strung the fish together, he whistled. Kiba bounced over from when he was lying to follow the boy. The young polar bear dog was soon to be 2 years old, and he now stood almost at the boy's shoulder. You know, it would be really great if you could fish too. Then we'd bring in more food for everyone. Kiba just snuffed in Sokka's direction. Hey, you eat more than I do, just saying. When the two finally got back to the village, Sokka was grinning. So far, he had passed every one of Bato's tests to show that he could provide. It wasn't too much longer until he became old enough for the ice dodging trial. But until then, he was still considered a child, showing that he was learning as much as he could about what the men was doing and going along the way to provide everyone and show that he was more than capable of doing such tasks. He looked around and he could tell that a lot of people were working, making nets and boats, patching and repairing parts that were getting worn. The net was what the little kids were working on. The boats were what the men in the tribe were repairing. He could see the women working on the homes and food. He frowned suddenly. Katara was nowhere to be seen, which typically meant that she was working on her waterbending. A sudden lump threatened to form in his throat. No. He was not going to think about Dad. That would always cause him to break down. And that wasn't happening today. He was about to go over to where his grandmother was smoking some of the latest catches of fish when he noticed that there was a noise being carried on by the wind. It almost sounded like a wounded tiger seal, but they didn't come this close to their village. He looked over to the village. No one else seemed to notice the sound, so Sokka made a decision. If it was a wounded animal, it would probably be better to put the creature out of its misery, especially if it was unable to move or do anything on its own. He quickly wrote out a message in the snow and deposited the fish next to the igloo. Then, whistling for Kiba, he started for the sound. It almost sounded like it was moving away from the village. Well, that made things a bit easier. If it was moving away from the village, then he would make sure that it didn't change its mind. Besides, he couldn't let all that tasty meat go to waste, right? Sokka made his way across the snow. The polar bear dog followed closely behind him. It took a while, traveling over the snow and ice he called home. But the closer and closer he got to the location of the bellows, the more and more he considered turning away. Something in him was urging him to leave whatever this was alone, while another part was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. He glanced over to Kiba, who snuffled along and nuzzled at his shoulder. Sokka patted the white dog. His expression was troubled as he traveled. Something was off. Sokka could just feel it in the air. Whatever it was, he wanted nothing to do with it. However, when he crested the next ridge, his eyes went as he noted a lone iceberg out in the middle of the ocean with what appeared to be a large white creature in it. The creature bellows could be heard clearly by now, and when he spotted it, Sokka suddenly paused and threw himself into the water. Sokka had just about enough time to stare, shocked, and when the creature managed to cross the waters and then jump out of the water, Kiba growled low in his throat, and the boy of the water tribe started scrambling back before he saw himself pronounced below a giant behemoth. A large, wet tongue then began licking him. Sokka could only shove back against the giant head. Whoa, what the heck, Kiba? You have any clues? Sokka looked over to his dog, only to find the dog now ceased the growling and was now sniffing the large creature. Sokka gave up and then looked back at the creature before him. It was definitely large, with a saddle across its wide back and a pair of horns on either side of its head. A strange brown arrow pattern was in its fur on the creature's forehead, while the rest was a large white color. It had 6 legs, which only added to the confusion about what the creature actually was. However, the creature had enough of Sokka trying to examine it, and decided to nuzzle the young boy again. Sokka shook his head, deciding that the mystery could hold for now, and he turned back to Kiba. Ugh. Why do I get the feeling that I'm not gonna get any good meat off this guy? I mean, come on. Meat doesn't just get all lovey-dovey with the person that's trying to eat it. For one wild moment, the creature then again gave him a snort and nugged him hard, knocking Sokka over. It then turned around and walked back to the shore edge, then bellowed again. Sokka shook his head and turned around, thinking that this had been some sort of weird dream, and maybe he just told the men of the tribe. However, the creature had other ideas. It bellowed again, before grabbing the back of Sokka's coat and chucking him onto its back with his teeth. Sokka then glared from his position in the saddle, none too happy about being manhandled while the beast itself started into the water. Oh no, you're not taking me off somewhere. Sokka made to jump, noting that Kiba was about to come to his aid when the creature jumped itself, seeming to float for a moment, before the two landed in the water. The splash that the creature made caused Sokka to get drenched, and the boy immediately swept his arms in a circle to draw the water off. He may not use waterbending all the time, like Katara insisted he should, but he did find it useful at times, like for staying dry. The creature didn't seem to care exactly what Sokka was doing, as he was moving now towards the iceberg it had left. Feeling of discomfort then returned into Sokka's heart, and suddenly, he had the urge to jump off the creature again and escape. He didn't get the chance, as the creature got to the lone iceberg and climbed atop it. Sokka slid off its back, shivering. He shouldn't be here, he thought. He turned to the creature. Okay, so you're not just some dumb meat creature. But seriously, can we go back now? The creature ignored him. However, it insisted to walk forward and nudge something into the snow. Sokka didn't want to look, but curiosity got the better of him, and he approached. Okay, whatever it is, fine, I'll look, and then we go back, deal? The boy stopped, and the cold suddenly hit him. He hopped off, and inside the snow was nestled a small body, not much older than he was. However, it didn't take a genius to realize if the creature had been trying to save it. It was much too late. The boy was blackened with frostbite and had taken on the leathery texture of seal jerky. Sokka swallowed hard and then backed off slowly. It was at this point images suddenly assaulted his mind. Glimpses of trees, high mountains, kids his own age, and creatures much like the one before him flashed through his mind. And whispered conversations drifted through the chaos. He flailed, trying to get his bearings, and he dimly heard the creature's bellow before being plunged into the icy waters behind him. Gyatso, it's true, isn't it? I'm the Avatar. The young boy sounded unsure and scared. Never before had he considered the possibility of something so impossible happening, and he wrapped his arms carefully around himself to disguise the nervousness he felt. The older man looked back towards the boy, kind features drooping a bit in sadness before he wrapped one arm around him. Yes, it is true. I would not have wished this for you, and I would not have wished you to find out this way, and certainly not so soon. You weren't supposed to find out until you were older. The boy looked up. What's gonna happen now? I mean, I'm not ready. I can't be the Avatar yet. Gyatso smiled and put the boy into a hug. They were walking through the halls, and they avoided the topic of what was going on for the entire day. However, the boy had to know. He couldn't think of no other person that was going to really let him know what's going to happen now. The elders couldn't understand. I will still be here to guide and protect you. That hasn't changed. And the others? I mean, they won't treat me differently, will they? The boy had to know. He wasn't ready. They had to know that. Sokka was drifting in a sea of chaos. He couldn't identify anything, and he opened his mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Then, just as suddenly, the chaos vanished, and he found himself collapsing onto the ice. Suddenly, very cold and shivering violently. A tongue licked him, and then right beside him, Sokka felt the warmth and cuddled into it. His breath coming in painful gasps. He knew he had to get up, had to move, but exhaustion had settled into his bones, along with the fatal cold of his homeland. It was then that he felt much bigger, and a much larger, wetter tongue lick him. Then a set of teeth grab him. Vaguely, he realized that the creature had picked him up, and he tried weakly to fight against it, hearing Kiba barking. Suddenly, the world fell away. If he had been more coherent, he would have realized that this is the first time he had flown. It had seemed like ages before they landed, and he could hear the screams and shouts for a healer. He felt some of the cold leave as he and his clothes were suddenly dry, and Katara's face came into view. She looked worried, and Sokka managed a weak grin. Hey sis. Katara looked ready to cry, and Sokka could only imagine what was causing this. He had stopped shivering, and was starting to feel warm. Too warm. Katara had placed a hand atop his forehead, which burned like fire. Sokka whimpered and tried to back away, but something grumbled behind him and nudged him towards the other waterbender. Don't worry. Gran's gonna get Mom, and someone else went to get the healer. You're going to be fine. The expression on her face spoke otherwise, and Sokka slipped out of consciousness before they arrived. Kaya stared worriedly at her son, her bottom lip in between her teeth as she listened to the healer's prognosis. Yuka had plenty of experience with the village, as well as the cold of their home, and her expertise could only be beaten by a waterbending healer. Sadly, there were no healing waterbenders in the southern weather tribe anymore, which left her mother-in-law standing in fear. Kana, at least, seemed to be watching the woman carefully as Yuka wrapped her blankets tighter and tighter around her grandson, and Kaya busied herself with assisting. So he's gonna be alright, right? Yuka shrugged, her expression somber as she looked towards Sokka. I can't say. His temperature keeps rising and falling steadily. Almost like every time he takes a deep breath, it increases. If it could raise and stay at a constant temperature, I wouldn't be so worried, but Kana nodded, and Kaya reached out and ran her hand through Sokka's hair. He certainly felt frozen, and if it hadn't been for the fact that Sokka was still breathing, she would have thought that he was dead from how gray he looked. She didn't want to lose her son like she'd lost her husband, but until he warmed back up, there wasn't much she could do. It's okay. We just need to keep him warm and dry, right? That should help. Yuka nodded. Also, try to feed him broth, tea, any hot liquids. That should help his temperature rise back up. If he starts shivering, encourage it. I suggest movement, but there's not. Yuka gasped, and her hands drew away. Kaya drew away too, her brow now tightening with worry as she stared. For just a moment, it seemed that one of Sokka's deep breaths had resulted in flames. What was that? Kana herself edged forward, her brow frowned as she studied her grandson. Yuka had placed a hand on his forehead, then alongside the blankets that wrapped him. He feels warmer. How? Kaya stared at both women. I could have sworn I saw flames just now, but Kana then shook her head, suddenly realizing the implication. But he's a waterbender. The only way he could firebend is if he's just not a waterbender. Yuka's voice now wavered, and she looked at both women carefully. I will inform Bato when he comes back from the hunt. What do we tell Sokka, though? He has to know. Kaya was gripping her son's blankets tight and swallowed it carefully. Kana shook her head. It would do no good to tell him now. No one can teach him. We have to send him north for waterbending training. As it is, what firebender would teach a water tribe avatar? The statement hung in the air between the three women. and Kaya worried her lip again. This wasn't fair. The boy that denounced his own branding was the Avatar. The moment seemed unreal, and she wished that Hakuto was still alive. He would have a better idea of what to do. Right? She thought. Katara fidgeted outside the igloo, hearing whispers and the low murmur of a healer speaking with her mother and grandmother. No one had said much, but the effects was still the same. Sokka hadn't woken up, and from what it looked like, he dunked into the ocean, and the healer was worried that he wouldn't wake up. Her eyes traveled across the village until they rested on the strange creature that had appeared with her brother. It seemed tame, especially with a strange saddle on its back, but Katara and the other kids had been warned all day to stay away from it by Bato. It was strange. The village had spotted some sort of weird light before the creature had appeared with Sokka, and the girl wondered if this had anything to do with her brother. He was cold, much too cold, and Katara shivered as she considered her brother's fate. If he'd fallen into the ocean with how cold it was right now before the winter set in? Apparently, she didn't have long to wait as Yuka exited the igloo, giving the young girl a nod. Katara didn't hesitate, rushing inside and blinking at the large fire at the center. Gran was currently next to the fire. Sokka was wrapped in blankets beside her, and her mother was busying herself with the pot, stirring it, adding some fish into the concoction. Kana smiled and gestured at Katara closer. "Hello, child. I do believe a thank you is in order." Katara sat next to her grandmother and looked towards Sokka and back at Kana. "Why, thank you, Gran. I do believe that you probably saved your brother's life." Kana reached out and touched Katara's hand. "He should be just fine, though he will need rest." Katara worried her lower lip for a moment before she curled towards Gran. "I'm glad. I didn't want to have to be the last waterbender." Her grandmother didn't say anything, but Kaya stepped towards her daughter and offered her a bowl of what looked like to be stew, though thinner than usual. "You won't be. We just have to wait for Sokka to wake up." She completely missed the look that her mother and grandmother gave each other. Instead, they decided to take her bowl and sit next to her brother, already berating him for jumping into the ocean. Anyway, guys, that's the end of chapter 2 of Avatar: The Legend of Sokka. Yes, Sokka is not only one of the last waterbenders in the Southern Water Tribe, he actually is the Avatar. And that boy that we saw in the snow, the one with leathery skin, who looked to be frostbite and dead for a while, it was Aang. And that might sting a lot of you and bite you the wrong way, that Aang is dead and died in such a manner, but we don't know the full story of what actually happened. And we're gonna see through Sokka's state that he was actually put into a flashback where he was living in this perspective of Aang. He saw Monk Gyatso hugging Aang and telling him that everything was gonna be okay. And we know where this story goes from now. Sokka is in critical condition as we move on to the next chapter. But before we do that, I want to let you guys know that a brand new Minecraft server has started, the JBT Minecraft server. It's a vanilla plus server with mods. I'm not talking about moderators. We have different types of mods in place to create factions, wars, all different types of stuff. Join the JBT Minecraft server by joining JBT Discord server, following me on Instagram and Twitter, and watching me stream on the JBT Discord on Twitch. Follow me or sub to me there, maybe if you want to. I don't know how subscribers work yet. I just started. But make sure that you tune in to everything Taco What Ifs. More content coming out soon and more videos just like this. Now, I'll see you in the future. Let's get to the next chapter.
She like yaddy yaya, she like yaddy yaya. Bitch, I'm rooting for ya. Bitch, I'm rooting for ya. She like yaddy yaya, she like yaddy yaya. Bitch, I'm rooting for ya. Bitch, I'm rooting for ya. Bitch, I'ma break the bank. Bitch, I'ma break the bank. Bitch, I'ma break the bank. Bitch, I'ma run at the check. Bitch, I'ma ball like a ref. Bitch, I'ma ball like a ref. She bout to give me some neck. Nigga, they mad and not like me. She bad, wanna be on my team. Photo the gap, bitch, I'm going to speed. You say that it's like it came with a beat.
bitch on my brain.